That's called ad-libbing, and you've met Jason, haven't you? That's risky. I am not a professional, just saying.
Good afternoon and welcome to Escape's podcast. I'm Jason Jenner, and we are having another discussion this afternoon about the hot topic of remote working, specifically around HP's RGS and some of the benefits and values of that. I'm joined this afternoon by a good friend and client of ours, Mr. Barry Zubel of LipSync. Barry, are you chief engineer? Are you head of technology? What can we call you?
So I'm head of systems for LipSync.
Head of systems for LipSync. Yeah. Super. Thank you for joining us.
No, thank you for inviting me.
And can you give us a little bit of an overview about who LipSync are, what kind of projects you currently work on, just so we get a picture of really what kind of environment we're talking about?
Oh, yeah, sure. For those that don't know, LipSync is a post-production house. So we deal with all sorts of post-production things like VFX. We do grade, we do audio mixes, we do all sorts of post-production work, the whole suite, in fact. I've been there about 2 years now. And I've taken over all of the systems roles and effectively rebuilding their entire network from the ground up with security and performance in mind. Okay, and in terms of the type of projects that LipSync work on, are we talking about specifically film or commercials, or is it really a mixture? It's film and TV shows. We don't really do commercials. It's film and TV shows.
So mainly long form content. Or,
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. And in terms of the sort of technology that we see kind of used across the business, then what are we talking about in terms of applications and that kind of thing?
VFX, pretty standard. It's mainly Nuke and Maya. With some Houdini thrown in for effects. We use base lights for color. We have flames for online. Audio is done on Dolby mixers. That pretty much covers, the main things.
Cool. So let's wind back a few weeks then. You are when the world was a vastly different place. And I remember us having a conversation several weeks back about that maybe there might be a need to do some remote working.
How prescient we were, yeah.
Yes, exactly. Give me a sense of how that was all shaping up in your mind. I mean, at what point do you remember thinking, we're going to have to do something here?
Actually, quite early on. I have to admit, it was quite early on. So obviously, with what's going on at the moment, there was the inkling that certain people might have to start working from home. And at that point, I thought it would be sensible to start looking holistically at how we would do it across the entire studio. Just putting in a solution for a couple of people is vastly different to putting in a solution for everyone.
Sure.
And, you can get away with some things if you're only doing it for a few people. But at the end of the day, it made sense because we didn't know how it was going to roll out. So we'd have to look at ways to give remote access to everyone as far as is feasibly possible. So obviously we have office workers, people like finance and that still need to get in. That was fairly easy to do with VPN or remote desktop. We already have Teradici. We use Teradici for our tech ops department to deal with DCP mastering. So there was the option to make that external for them. But the biggest problem for us was our VFX department. We had nothing in place. VFX historically is a very secure environment. Our internal network is locked down quite heavily. And the thought of being able to give remote access to that is one that's always given me pause in the past. But here we were at a situation where, okay, we're going to have to look at doing something. So that's obviously when I first spoke to you. As we were familiar with Teradici to start with, that was kind of the solution I'd had in mind. So having spoken to you, looked at the availability of kit and looked at the various requirements, for example, the bandwidth requirements, we just wouldn't be able to cope by putting 60 artists on Teradici. We have a couple of gigs of internet bandwidth. We have a couple of half-decent firewalls, but they're rated for VPN for about 350 megabits each. So you're talking an aggregate of about 700 megabits of traffic. So Teradici probably wasn't going to fly, so I had to look for something else. And that's when I started digging quite deeply into looking at RGS. which surprisingly I'd never heard of. I'd never seen it before, and I'd never heard of it.
And did you have lots of HP workstations already in the business?
It was our VFX floor, and we run almost entirely on HP
on Z series boxes. Yeah, I mean, it is sort of curious that RGS is something that HP have never really made a great deal of fuss about, and suddenly there were all these people searching for remote working solutions that had all this capability and didn't really know about it.
So, I mean, yeah, that was my first reaction was, okay, this looks great. How much is it? And then I realized that it's effectively bundled with the price of the workstation. I'm sure my financial director right now is very happy with that decision.
Well, absolutely, yeah. RGS actually has been rebranded. It's now called Z Central Remote Boost.
Correct.
It obviously had a huge financial attraction, given that it wasn't something, well, assuming that the number of licenses that you needed was exactly the same as the number of workstations you already owned.
Correct, yes.
And was that the case?
Largely, yes. So almost every single one of our VFX artists was on an HP machine already. There were a couple that weren't, but we had spare HP Z series machines that we could effectively transfer them onto. And so that effectively made it, from point of sale, a cost of zero. Now, that's very attractive, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But of course, it's not that attractive if it doesn't work.
No, I mean, stuff that's free and is rubbish. It's still rubbish.
Exactly. So, I mean, again, this was fairly early days. So I was having a look at exactly how good you could get the quality. So for VFX, there are, certainly we break our VFX into largely two departments, 2D, who mainly use Nuke, and 3D, who mainly use Maya. They have slightly different requirements in terms of, things like operating Maya over a remote connection is awkward in any way, shape or form that you do it. Nuke is a lot simpler. So we were looking at actually different solutions. Again, we looked at, I think it's a product called NX Server, NX or FreeNX or whatever variants there are of it. That seemed great for very simple kind of 2D work, but it just did not handle 3D applications at all, which is obviously why we were leaning more towards looking at the HP RGS product at the time.
For the uninitiated, Baz, what is it specifically about the 3D applications that's more challenging?
So actually, it's operating Maya itself. So being able to twist, rotate, transform, a model on the screen. When you are using a product like NX Server or even remote desktop on Windows, something like that isn't specifically designed to operate those 3D environments, you get a lot of latency. It's not pixel perfect, so trying to grab hold of a handle of something may miss. Re-rendering the screen is very expensive, so it takes a lot of time. So all of those things roll together to make it not an optimal solution for something like Maya or Houdini, in fact.
No, and they have a direct impact on the artist experience fundamentally.
Exactly, and here we are. We're trying to give our artists as much flexibility to be able to work as possible during the current situation, and giving them a substandard tool seemed a little bit like a false economy, so to speak.
Yeah, sure.
So I was looking at RGS, and obviously I ran some tests internally through some test beds of ours, and I was straight away quite impressed at how good the quality was. Obviously, this was internal testing in the office over decent speeds anyway, but the quality of what was actually being sent back was far in excess of anything else, and you could operate Nuke very effectively, you could operate Maya very effectively, and Houdini very effectively. So I was testing in the office, and that it was a day of kind of figuring out how it worked, setting it up, figuring out the various security parameters, things like disabling clipboard. We are effectively tunneling into a secure network, so we need to prevent ways to egress data. Once we'd figured out how all of those kind of worked and got that set up, we then tested it over the VPN, and again was pleasantly surprised. VPNs cause problems. There's extra CPU overhead, there's extra latency involved. So even though we'd done our internal testing, it was, we had to test this through external VPN connections, and it worked almost as good as if you were in the office. The quality was there. And of course, there's dials and sliders you can use to adjust the quality. And in fact, we do get some of our artists to do that. If they're working on a very specific part of the screen that they need to look at and it needs to be high quality, we get them to dial the quality up, work on that, and then dial it back down again, so that they can dynamically do that for their requirements at their end. And I think we looked at the average kind of stream from an active worker is about 5 megabits, between 5 and 7 megabits. Now that's a single 2560 by 1440 screen. Okay. We do have some people who are operating pairs or a 2560 by 1440 with a smaller secondary monitor over IGS as well. But our normal default deployment is a single 2560 by 1440 for remote work. And yeah, it's about a 5 to 7 megabit stream, which is very easy to deal with. For our point of view, 40 to 60 concurrent streams quite comfortably balanced across 2 firewalls. And yeah, I mean, it's just worked.
And what have the artists got at the domestic end then, Barry? If they got, you mentioned some have dual, some have single panels displays. What are they using to do the decoding part of it at the desktop?
So it varies, but it's actually mostly their own equipment. So there have been cases where people have said, we actually asked all of our artists what kind of equipment they had at home. Would they feel comfortable using their own equipment? Did they want us to supply any equipment? And for the most part, most of the artists had something that was reasonably recent, less than 3 or 4 years old, of a decent spec, a decent CPU for decode, obviously. There were a few people that didn't. I think that's the polite way to put it. Didn't. So actually, we sent them home with workstations that we had, and not even high-powered graphics workstations. I'm talking the kind of desktops that we normally ship out for our office use. So, 4 to 8 cores, 16 gig of memory, an SSD boot drive, but and a onboard or even an NVIDIA graphics card, but nothing special, nothing that was particularly heavy, and they're working fine. Which again it wasn't a consideration necessarily in advance, but I was quite pleasantly surprised at how well it does actually decode the stream.
And so we were talking about, what were the numbers? It was about 60 people in total, was it, for the VFX department?
Yeah, it give or take. Yeah, I mean we've actually been hiring during the last few weeks as well. We've onboarded people entirely remotely using RGS, for them to operate. But yeah, it's around about 60.
Yeah. Okay. And so in terms of the rollout, then what are the sort of what's the time overhead for you or members of your engineering team to kind of roll that out for 60 artists? I mean, how long did it take you?
It was actually quite easy. We were using the 7.7 release of RGS and not the new Z Central version. That was the version I had managed to lay my hands on at short notice. It's a couple of RPMs to install. So we actually did all of our config via our config management. We used Puppet. So once our test box was, we were happy with the config, all of the clipboarding and the security side of it, we rolled it out with Puppet, and it took 30 minutes across the entire estate.
Wow, for everybody.
Now that's obviously the sender side. Receiver side, some people we pre-configured. If it was a machine we were sending back with an artist, we pre-configured it, off you go. And then if it was their own machine, it was effectively, here's a download link, here are some instructions, and here's obviously the VPN instructions. And so most people, a little bit of hand-holding here and there, but most people were very self-sufficient and managed to get themselves online and onto their workstation very quickly.
Fantastic. And I mean, in terms of, you mentioned their workstation there, in terms of, an artist's relationship with their own machine that they use habitually. I mean, was that being, in terms of what sort of permissions or authentication structure was that being bound to?
So we have centralized auth on the workstations, and the HP remote software uses the same same login credentials they use on their machine. So it's effectively the passwords that they have set themselves, that they know follow our security. They have one password to get in via the VPN with a 2-factor fob, and then they have obviously the username and password to get onto RGS to get onto their machine itself. Now the VPN side of it, actually, I mean, it works very well, but one of the things I have been considering is looking at a broker, because the VPN encryption overhead on the firewalls, while light, is still there, and our firewalls, they're under a lot more load than they normally would be, still operating perfectly fine, but we're still using our internet circuits for data transfers in and out to clients and all sorts. So there's an element of, that there's that overhead on the firewall I'd like to lose if we can. So I think the next logical step for us is looking at a broker and seeing if we can use that to, one, lower the load on the firewalls, but also going sagging back to the artist's own machine is abstracting away the idea of a personal machine and just using a pool. Because one of the things we have found is, artists have this innate ability to break their machines. When you're in the office, that's easy. You wander up and you 3-prong reset or kick it or something. Now, when you're remote, and we literally have left all our workstations in place on the floor, if we can't get to it, no one can get to it. So we actually have to send people in and out. Now, that's awkward to do that sort of thing, and shuffling people between their workstation and a set of spares that we have in the corner just in case, and then shuffling by maintaining all of that. It's actually a daily pain for me. We probably spend half an hour a day just going, okay, that machine's down, we'll shuffle this over, and a broker would very much make that a lot simpler.
Yeah, a broker's just going to marry up an artist to an available workstation resource, and
exactly,
the artist doesn't care, right? As long as they've got the right applications and access to their projects and the scene files they're working on.
And in fact, we're already using a broker for the Teradici stuff that we have, and it supports HPRGS as well. So we just need to look at expanding the licenses on that and seeing if that works.
Which broker are you currently using?
LeoStream.
Oh, you are using LeoStream. Okay.
Yeah, we're using LeoStream. In fact, I use LeoStream to hook myself into the office onto my admin workstation, which is a Linux box also running IGS. So I know the whole end-to-end works with a bit of tweaking. So and actually, that it works so well that there's no VPN overhead on the firewall, and it's for us. Theoretically, it's a matter of getting the license, redirecting some people through the LeoStream external broker, and they have their pool of machines that they can access.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting stuff. Just to backtrack slightly there, I think you kind of answered this, but just for clarification, I think you talked about the VPN and when you were evaluating RGS or Z Central Remote Boost for the VFX guys, maybe Teradici for other guys, the VPN and the firewall seem to be a governing factor in all of that. Were there any changes to your underlying infrastructure that you had to make in order to facilitate remote working for any artist in particular?
So for the VFX side, we had to pop a single port hole in the ACL that allows access to that for obviously the RGS port. Mm-hmm. So the Teradici side of things was quite complicated. We had to upgrade our broker and install a reverse proxy gateway effectively. That took a little while. But once it was working, it's working, and it's just been absolutely solid ever since. It's been brilliant. So other than those two fairly minor changes, no. I mean, infrastructurally, we didn't have to do anything.
Yeah, okay, which is, pretty impressive, really, to think about the kind of change you've made to the structure of people's working and really how little sort of infrastructure fabric tinkering that's required is. Yeah,
absolutely. Once we had a route from the VPN that would allow the RGS traffic to pass through, it was that easy. It just worked.
So, can we talk a little bit about security? Because I am, and how this works with that, and any of your thoughts around that subject. Because I presume LipSync work on quite a bit of feature film content. I would presume that you are governed by TPN, MPAA type levels of security with quite a lot of what you do. Would that be correct?
Yes, absolutely. So the first thing that we found was incredibly important is to stay in touch with your clients. Mm-hmm. Now, that I'm not going to, that isn't to be overstated, actually. We're all working in what we would consider not normal circumstances. And if you start elbowing and tearing your network apart to make people able to work from home, and your clients aren't aware, that can cause problems straight away. Sure. So what you have, what we did is we talked to our clients and we said, we are going to have to provision some sort of remote access. This is how we're proposing to do it. In fact, part of the TPN guidelines has I think there's a paragraph in there for, and I'm air quoting here, emergency remote access, which you can invoke in an emergency, which is actually...
I can confirm Barry did just air quote on video.
But, that's basically what we did. We took the decision that, we were going to invoke emergency remote access, and we've set everything up, as I was kind of touching on earlier, so that you can't egress work out of the network. The only thing that there's, I suppose, a question mark over, and that is the fact that content is being displayed on a remote screen, mm-hmm. and we don't have control of that screen. Somebody could take a photo of that screen or take a video of that screen, and we don't have direct control.
You have control of the workstation driving it.
Absolutely.
You are not in the room with that screen, are you?
Exactly. Yeah. And that's one I think we've had to take a judgment call on, really. We employ our artists, we trust our artists. We don't expect any of them to intentionally go and do anything that would breach security. There's an element of people using their own machines at home. That has caused some concern, although because effectively this is a pane of glass into our secured network, that's slightly less of an issue. Plus the fact we use two-factor on our credentials to log into various things. So there's no easy, opportune way for something like a keylogger to steal those credentials or get in, from any other way. So in terms of security, we refer to it, it's a pane of glass into the network. And as I said, the only real limitation that we could see that could be an issue is we don't control that remote workstation.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's an interesting kind of distinction, isn't it? Because did anybody, that would presumably be more a producer type person that would have that discussion, but where you had to, be candid and say to a client, well, hey, look, we're in control of the workstation here, but it's in a room in someone's, in an artist's domestic location, and we're not in the room and we can't see the screen. Did that have to be broached in any way with clients?
It was brought up, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it had to be, for the interest of transparency.
Yeah.
In, I think, every single case, the client was incredibly understanding, largely because the client would like their work completed very quickly.
Yes, and presumably also they're aware of the fact that there is also no choice. So
Indeed. So
those two factors, yeah.
Yeah, so those two do combine together to make it quite a compelling argument why it should be permitted in this. And I mean, don't get me wrong, we have definitely not relaxed any of the other security work that we do, both on our internal corporate network and our egresses. And so we are keeping a very close eye on traffic in and out, transfers in and out, all sorts of things like that. So we definitely haven't relaxed our security posture. In fact, I'd say it was probably higher than it usually is, despite the fact we've got people remote working.
So let's just talk about a little bit about some of the higher capability or the higher resource using workstations, things like Flame, Baselight, that kind of workflow. Mm-hmm. You've done that in a different way.
Actually, so our Flames are running on RGS.
Okay.
But they do not have access to their SDI out at the moment. So what they're actually doing is they're doing most of their work remotely, and then they are spending either one day a fortnight in kind of finishing up, or one day a week in finishing up. There's certain bits they can't at the moment do remotely. Our base lights, our colorists are in. There's at the moment there's no effective way for them to work remotely.
And what are the technical limitations that mean that is the case?
Color, and color. Yeah. Apparently. Now, I'm no expert in color, and I really wish I was. No, that's a lie. but
you can't know everything, Barry.
I mean, yeah, indeed. We do have one colorist who has literally picked up a basslight and taken it home, and is working on it from home. That is working very well. It's a little bit harder to do with some of the ones that drive our big projectors.
Yes,
I definitely don't want to unbolt that from the ceiling, let alone let somebody take it home, for example.
Of course, yeah.
So if we have work that needs to be done on the color side, then our colorists are going in. Audio mixes. A lot of our audio guys have equipment at home that is almost as good as what we have in the office for the most part. What they're missing out on is the thing like the Atmos mixers and things, which they will have to come in to do final mixes on the Atmos mixers. And one of them that really likes cuddling the desk, he comes in to work as well. But again, those things, it's because the technology is bolted to the building and there's no easy way to remove it and, or remote onto it as yet. One of the things we have been looking at is remote grade review. So obviously we need directors to be able to review grades and give us the thumbs up and the thumbs down. And without traveling into us at the moment, that's very difficult to do. and we've been looking at various options on that. I think the one we're currently looking at is the SohoNet Clearview Flex, I think it is. Yeah, which is, it's exactly for this on SDI. It gives you a 420, I think, at the remote end, which is, not perfect, but certainly good enough. And, as a stopgap measure, I think that's probably the way we're going to lean. We've looked at a couple of other things. I can't remember what they were offhand, but this thing looks like it's the only thing on the market, or the only product on the market that actually does the job we want it to do. So.
Yeah, certainly what we're hearing from other studios is that's been getting a pretty favourable reception. That piece of technology, that seems to be the way that part of the remote workflow will go.
Yes,
for sure. Yeah. And I presumably, this is true, I think, of, Remote Boost, Z Central, or Teradici, but you have an 8-bit limit, don't you, on either of those protocols? So for grading a colour artist, that's obviously a problem.
Yeah. I think SohoNet are working on expanding that out, but who knows when that might be done?
Who knows when that's going to come? Yeah. Well, actually, with that in mind, then that leads on to an easy next question. Are there things in the technology that you wish were there that aren't yet? That being the obvious one, presumably, but is there anything else that you think, it'd be really nice if that was included or that was available?
That's a really good question, and it's not one I've really thought about. Now you've put me on the spot now, Jason. That's not fair.
All right, you can think about that. We can come back to it. We can. This will be our pitch to our friends at HP to say, here we go. I just wondered if there's anything you thought, if only we didn't have to do that, or there was a workaround for that, or.
They have recently or are about to release the broker, if they haven't already, but that was definitely missing, I think. Having to go to a third party for a broker is a little bit nonsensical in some, unless you've already got it and it's integrated into your system. But having a broker themselves makes a lot of sense, I think. And so I think if it was anything, it would have been that probably. But they've already solved that. Yeah,
exactly. Okay. Overall, it's actually, as we've already highlighted, it was a piece of technology buried in people's workstations that most people didn't know they even had. It's an extraordinarily robust and capable solution given what we're all facing at the moment. So let's talk a little bit about the wider position on this then. I'd be interested in your view on where this is all going. So, we've had this conversation with one or two other guests on the podcast from other studios. And obviously here's a situation where you've got everybody working from home using, various technology, heavily RGS in this particular case. What does that do you think, to the structure of the business going forward post-pandemic? Restrictions are easing or lifting. What do LipSync think about, how their business looks like on the other side of that, having been through this remote working structure?
So it's certainly highlighted that remote working is possible in more circumstances than were originally thought. So originally, the thought of anybody in VFX working remotely was ridiculous, right? Nobody would entertain that thought. Well, absolutely not. They'll have to come in the office. And then the situation like this occurs, which makes people think, well, actually, that really isn't possible. So we have to work remotely. Suddenly, these jobs can be done remotely. Not necessarily at 100% efficiency. One of the things that we've noticed is a lot of people are working completely different hours now because obviously they're fitting in around either looking after kids or all sorts of things that are happening during the day. But they're still working, if more, in fact, hours than they probably would have been in the office. Looking at some of the information we have, but they're fitting it in around when they want to work rather than having to be in the office from 10 till 6 or 10 till 7 or whatever. Now, that's interesting in many ways. From a tech standpoint, it means that if we were to look at like permanently remote working, you can actually make savings on things like workstations, because you can actually almost split shift people, because people are willing to work hours in and out of and around your normal office hours. Yes. So suddenly that opens up effectively twice as many people on similar hardware in theory, and also much less cost on premise, of course. We don't have to have cleaners in at the moment. there's all sorts of associated facility costs that actually, at the end of the day, if you could pick all the workstations up, rack them, RGS them, you don't need an office suddenly.
No, or at least a much smaller one.
Yeah, and I mean that's quite a drastic way to look at it, but that is definitely a way to look at it. I've been exploring various, like the running a facility in AWS, direct connect yourself back to AWS and run your workstations in AWS, things like that. That's kind of proven now. It can work. I haven't done it. I don't know anyone that's jumped in with both feet and done that. There are a couple of facilities in London, I think, that are almost entirely working off of AWS, but nobody else is considering it.
Yeah.
But actually, if you sit and think about it, you could make quite a compelling case for it.
Yeah, I think there are lots of changes. It's quite an interesting answer you've given there. There's quite a bit to unpack in that, really, because there's the impact on content creation studios economically, as you say. You can perhaps use a smaller hardware estate to drive a larger proportion of artists because people will work in a flexi-hour structure. There are also some social factors in there, I think, as you sort of touched upon children and stuff. I mean, I'm in this position myself. My wife and I both work. We've got 2 small children that are currently at home. There is no way, unless one of us decides that we're just going to stop working and the other carries on, there is no way for us both to work without having some kind of time exchange structure.
Exactly.
Where I do a bit and then I stop and vice versa. And obviously there are millions of people currently wrestling with that. And it does throw into the mix this whole process of, well, actually, the 9 to 5 or the 9 to 6 kind of structure is sort of entirely farcical, really, under the current restrictions that we're all working.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's interesting that you've seen that with your kind of, your activity logs.
Yeah, no, we've definitely seen that. I mean, I find myself doing it as well. I mean, I've never really been I turn up at 9 and finish at 6 kind of person. I've always worked out of hours, and working in systems, you have to do stuff out of hours. But I find myself, I'll be working late into the night because there's something that needs doing, and I'm sat at home, and I've been at home all day, so I haven't really realised that it's time to go home. And you just carry on going until it's finished. You don't have to get off your chair and get on the tube and take an hour to get home, and then cook your dinner and then try and remember where you were. You just carry on doing it. So it's quite interesting. I was reading an article, I think this morning, that Tatar, the big Indian outsource outfit, they are going to be mandating working from home in the future. They've seen productivity go up,
right?
Mandating their entire workforce to work from home.
Yeah,
which I thought was quite an interesting takeaway. But
hugely, I think. Yeah, I mean, I had a conversation with one of our other sort of partners. A large studio with a very big number of artists who I obviously can't name, but they're doing a lot of remote working at the moment, and said, well, we might do a bit more of this actually. And again, if you'd wound back, if you wind back 5 or 6 weeks and had said to them, would you put that volume of people working off site? I think they would have said no. And
that's a polite way to put it, yeah.
Exactly. They might have given a slightly more vehement answer, but So it is interesting the way it's going to change things, I think. And in terms of the, again, just to maybe elaborate on that point a little bit, you did sort of dance across this a minute ago, but you mentioned the client review thing, and obviously you were looking at SohoNet, Clearview Flex and stuff. So that whole part of the workflow where you've got a client review or a client attend component. And if I push that a little bit further and ask about, shot collaboration and, shot management and stuff like that, and maybe things like Shotgun, what has been the impact in that regard in terms of the way you're doing things?
Well, I mean, we were using Shotgun anyway. And obviously that has continued to work as before, as it's cloud hosted. We haven't changed our operation of that at all, really. And we use it for our time tracking. We use it for our allocation, and that's going on, as it was before. No change at all. I can't really think of anything else tools wise that we've had to alter hugely for remote access. One of the things I have, it's an incidental thing I've noticed is, the younger generation, and I count myself as part of the older generation now, I suppose, the younger generation have taken to this like a fish to water.
Right, okay.
They have had no problems with the remote working, communicating via, Teams or Zoom or whichever. They've had no problems. Again, I'll include myself in this, the older generation have not taken to it so well.
Okay.
But I just found that was a kind of an interesting incidental to notice. Youngsters who have grown up with all this technology around them, it's second nature to them. It really is. So, telling people, okay, you're working from home, you'll be communicating with teams, we'll be doing daily Zoom meetings. They go, yeah, that's fine. Let's carry on.
Yeah, they're culturally just, used to having an awful lot of communication, even socially, where they're not in the same place as the people they're communicating with. But yeah, that is fascinating. Okay, well, I think unless there's anything else that you want to volunteer, I think we've kind of covered everything there. That's been really interesting. Thank you. Some really interesting insights. Thank you very much for joining us.
Oh, thank you very much for inviting
me. You're most welcome. You're one of your somebody on your LinkedIn profile described you as a brain on two legs, which I think is fair, and I think it deserves repeating here. So thank you for your contributions.
Thank you very much.
Yes, that's all from us this afternoon. Thank you for listening. And if you need any more information about HP Remote Boost Z Central or RGS, as it used to be called, by all means, feel free to contact us and seek the links in the page on our website. Thank you very much.